There is an old saying, the universe is made of stories, not atoms. Stories are the threads that weave together our collective understanding of who we are and who we can become. They shape our moral imagination, inspire our actions, and sustain us in the long, hard work of change. Stories from history remind us of what is possible. Songs inspire and inform. Moral tales teach. Biographies remind us we're not alone. And fiction helps us imagine. Stories have power. For many of us, the challenges of our time, the erosion of democracy, climate chaos, rising inequality, may feel unprecedented. Yet history is full of examples of individuals and communities rising to meet immense challenges. Our ancestors and the people who lived on the land we now call home confronted injustice, overcame adversity, and fought for a more just and equitable world. When my husband was in school, he learned about the Holocaust and asked his mother, why didn't they leave? Why didn't they go before it got so bad? That question stayed with him and with me. 8 years ago, we began asking ourselves the same thing as the tides of hatred and division rose around us. Eventually, we made the decision to leave the US for Portugal. Now, nearly 5 years later, I can look back and recognize how prioritizing safety, especially for him as a trans man and for me as someone with chronic illness, was an act of courage and love. This is what I want to tell those among us who carry additional burdens. Those who are transgender, chronically ill or disabled, undocumented, or facing systemic marginalization. If you are able, prioritize your safety and well-being. There's no obligation to risk your life in the fight for justice and love. That's what the rest of us are here for. When you are at risk of drowning, put on your own life jacket, and then you can help others. We need each one of us to survive. We all have stories, stories of our own personal survival, of our ancestors, and of the land we call home. And stories can be transformative and life-saving. Take, for example, our congregation's building is a sanctuary. Immigration officers may have the legal right now to enter a hospital, a school, or a church, but our Unitarian Universalist faith is grounded in justice and equality. We can raise our voices and tell the moral story. What is moral and right? If they know that we will share the story of violating a sacred space, it might change their actions. Whether today's fear, outrage, and anxiety is new to you, or you've been doing this work since your mama explained what the words racism, sexism, colonizing, and homophobia meant, we learn from stories. These days, I find myself leaning into my Slovak roots and embracing the history of my adopted home, Portugal, by learning about how both nations overthrew oppressive regimes. Last year, I was leaving the little village of Silves, crossing the bridge with the old Moorish castle in my rearview mirror. The bridge was decorated with little red flowers, crocheted carnations. I realized the flowers celebrated the 50th anniversary of the Carnation Revolution, a peaceful uprising that overthrew decades of dictatorship in Portugal. The Carnation Revolution of 1974 is a powerful example of collective action's ability to bring about transformation. After years of repression under the Estado Novo regime, the Portuguese people rose up. Life under Estado Novo, new state, established by Antonio Salazar in 1933, was austere and harsh. People who spoke out against the regime often disappeared, and mandatory military service sent countless young men to fight unwinnable colonial wars. The revolution was sparked in part by military officers who were opposed to the regime's brutal colonial wars, but it became a civilian movement. First, the brave ones chose, then more folks were able to be brave, and people poured into the streets, placing carnations in the barrels of soldiers' guns as a symbol of peace. Remarkably, the regime fell without bloodshed. was replaced by provisional government, and that ushered in democracy. The lyrics of songs are transformative stories as well. The revolution's spirit was captured in the song Grandola, Villa Morena by Jose Afonso, played as a signal to start the uprising. Its lyrics, Grandola, Villa Morena, Terra de Fraternidad, is Grandola, the village, dark village, land of brotherhood, this embodied the ideals of freedom, unity, and fraternity. There's a warning in the Salazar regime. He was an economist and bureaucrat who was elected, but Prime Minister Salazar's reforms turned into 40 years of repressive totalitarianism. There is also hope. In the end, truth, courage, compassion, and vision won. The Portuguese people remember and say, never again. The Carnation Revolution reminds us that peaceful resistance, joy, and solidarity can bloom even in the face of oppression. The Velvet Revolution is another example of the power of peaceful resistance. In 1989, when my son was just 3, Czechoslovakia saw its dreams of freedom and democracy realized. Playwright and activist Václav Havel encouraged individuals to live in truth by rejecting the lies of the totalitarian state and reclaiming authenticity. His plays made fun of the regime. He defended a rock band that was imprisoned because their hair was long and also because of their lyrics, and he ended up in jail occasionally himself. But he persevered. In every soul and nation comes a time to decide if you will seek truth or falsehood. The people of Czechoslovakia chose to live in truth. The name Velvet Revolution reflects the smooth and nonviolent transition of power. Millions gathered together to peacefully end decades of Soviet rule, armed only with their voices, their keys, and their shared vision for a community transformed by care. The Velvet Revolution teaches us that change does not always require violence. It can arise from trust, poetry, and collective action. As Václav Havel wrote, "We never decided to become dissidents. We have been transformed into them without quite knowing how. Sometimes we have ended up in prison without precisely knowing how. We simply went ahead and did certain things that we felt we ought to do and that seemed to us decent to do. Nothing more nor less." Stories sustain us in times of upheaval. They remind us that ordinary people, daring to dream of a better world, have faced impossible odds and prevailed. Stories of hard times and hard work share a common thread. They inspire courage, resilience, and action. Let us remain faithful to the work that must be done. When the challenges we face, climate chaos, inequality, systemic racism, feel overwhelming, stories whisper to us, you are not alone. Others have traveled this path before you, and you can too. In the words of Unitarian minister Theodore Parker, later paraphrased by Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. And I like to add, so we want to grab hold of the end of it and pull. That phrase itself has become a story, a reminder that while justice may take time, it is always worth striving for. As Unitarian Universalists, we are called to build the world we dream of, a world of love and justice. This work requires vision, action, and the spiritual sustenance that stories provide. When we tell the stories of the women's suffrage movement, the civil rights movement, and the ongoing fight for LGBTQIAA+ equality, we honor the resilience of those who refuse to let injustice have the final word. These stories teach us that change may be slow, but it is possible, and it is worth fighting for. Many of these stories are stories of anger, but they are also stories where that righteous anger was used as fuel to empower and persevere. The women of the suffrage movement fought tirelessly for the right to vote, facing ridicule and violence. In 1920, 72 years after the Seneca Falls Convention, the United States finally passed the 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote. Of the 68 women who signed the Declaration of Sentiments at Seneca Falls in 1848, only one, Charlotte Woodward Pierce, lived to celebrate that day. This story reminds us that change often happens incrementally, but that persistent effort can ultimately bring about profound transformation. The civil rights movement in the United States offers another powerful example. Figures like Rosa Parks, Ruby Bridges, and countless others were brave in the face of fear to mobilize communities and inspire a nation. If you haven't read Ruby Bridges' autobiography yet, I recommend it. Her story is painful and inspiring, partly because of the commitment she and her parents must have had to send a little girl into danger by simply sending her to school. What a commitment to the future of all children. And partially because it was so recent. Ruby Bridges just turned 70 this year. Their courage and unwavering commitment to justice remind us that even in the face of immense opposition, justice can prevail. The LGBTQIA+ rights movement, from the elders of the Mattachine Society and Daughters of Bilitis, who paved the way, to the trans activists from the Stonewall riot, such as Marsha Pay It No Mind Johnson, to brave activists today wrestling basic human rights onto the books through ongoing struggles for equality. When I went door to door for marriage equality, I learned that data didn't move people. Stories did. Personal stories, challenging societal norms, breaking down stereotypes, and inspiring countless individuals to live authentically. And joy, the joy of drag queens and pride parades, reminds us that joy is a critical part of our work. The story of struggle reminds us that our diversity is strength. The climate justice movement, led by young people like Greta Thunberg and indigenous communities like the Standing Rock Sioux tribe, is another example of storytelling's power. These individuals share their lived experiences of the devastating impacts of climate chaos, inspiring action and demanding a more sustainable future. They lift up their voices in song, story, and truth. They remind us that we are interdependent across generations and with the web of all life. Each story is not just about challenges, it's also about the determination and resilience of communities working together to create a more just and equitable future for all. We must listen to the voices of those who have lived under marginalization and threat of violence. They already know how to survive and even thrive when the world feels dangerous. Stories of real people being brave or just doing the things they felt they ought to do or what seemed decent to do can sustain us. So can fiction. One of my favorites is The Lord of the Rings, the story of a small hobbit carrying a ring through dangers, finding friends, and in the end, saving the world by being small and faithful to the task given to him. At one point, he's speaking with the wise and powerful wizard Gandalf. "I wish it need not have happened in my time," said Frodo. "So do I," said Gandalf, "and so do all who live to see such times. But that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us." What sustains people through times of great upheaval? Stories of ordinary people daring to persist, dream, and act. Stories that remind us we are a part of something greater than ourselves. When we feel overwhelmed, we can turn to these stories for strength. They tell us, you are not alone. Others have faced similar struggles and found their way forward. Stories are the lifeblood of our shared humanity. They help us remember who we are and imagine who we can become. This week, I invite you to reflect on a story that inspires you. It could be from history, a loved one, your own life, fiction. Share it with someone and listen to their story in return. Together, let us weave a tapestry of solidarity, perseverance, and action. Let us stay faithful to the work before us and stay grounded in the power of our shared stories.